take scientists to our earliest beginnings.
The CTV National News with Lloyd Robertson.
Good evening. A full-fledged rescue mission to save the Beach Lake Accord began today in Ottawa. It follows hard on the heels of Newfoundland's decision to withdraw support for the agreement and Quebec's decision that Beach must not be renegotiated. So, a committee of the House of Commons has begun a cross-Canada series of public meetings. Beginning with New Brunswick Premier Frank McKenna, the sessions will give Canadians a chance to say what they think about the constitutional document. More in this report from Diana Bishop.
New Brunswick's Frank McKenna was the first premier to withhold his support of the Beach Lake Accord. Now he's seen as its possible savior.
And we've got to cool the inflammatory rhetoric. When I'm asked the question, do I choose Quebec or Newfoundland? I answer, I choose them both. And I think that should be the answer of every Canadian.
McKenna says his province will finally ratify the accord if there's enough support for his improvements. The New Brunswick Premier wants the federal government to promote bilingualism, in addition to recognizing Quebec as a distinct society. He says only Ottawa should have the right to create new provinces, and his proposals would protect the rights of women and Aboriginal people who were left out of the Beach Lake Accord. McKenna says his changes leave the Beach Lake Accord intact, something that should satisfy Quebec.
There is no threat to the integrity of the current accord in any of the items contained in this resolution.
But McKenna added that his rescue plan may not be enough, not without some promise of Senate reform.
I believe in Senate reform, but we believe that there are other personalities and provinces much more closely associated with the issue that should be bringing forward suggestions around which some consensus could develop.
After the hearing, McKenna was asked whether Beach Lake had just become mission impossible.
No, I'm optimistic in public and I'm really optimistic in private. And if you watch Mission Impossible, they always succeed, so.
McKenna's proposals will form the basis of these public hearings, which begin touring the country next week. They're designed to make Beach Lake more acceptable to its critics, but so far its toughest opponents, namely Newfoundland and Manitoba, have shown little interest in McKenna's salvage operation. Diana Bishop, CTV News, Ottawa.
The goods and services tax is expected to clear the House of Commons tomorrow. On the eve of that approval, the Pro-Canada Network staged its largest protest against the tax so far. In what amounted to a nationwide petition, union members cast their ballots at union halls all across the country. Non-union people dialed special phone numbers to record their opposition. And by day's end, the anti-tax movement said it had recorded 2.1 million protest ballots. Ottawa Bureau Chief Craig Oliver reports.
Leaders of the nationwide anti-GST coalition led the protest march in the capital, carrying a coffin representing the death of the Conservative government's tax plan. They were followed by hundreds of taxi cabs, drivers handing out leaflets expressing their opposition to a tax they say will boost costs and taxi fares.
Come on, you guys, free charge, not charge, Rosen will charge you for it.
One rooftop passenger defiantly announced the start of a war on GST.
The bastards lied again.
Protesters condemned the Conservatives for not having put the sales tax in their election platform. The president of the Canadian Labour Congress predicted 1 million people would send in ballots or phone in their opposition to the tax. On Parliament Hill, however, they numbered only in the hundreds, and crowds were small in some other cities. Still, Carr predicted the government is feeling the heat.
We are not going to take it anymore. And we are here to tell you, Mr. Prime Minister, we're here to tell you that you better start listening, because enough is enough and we've just started.
In Toronto, as elsewhere across the country, unions organized an anti-GST ballot. Ontario government workers had to cast their votes out on the street when their employer refused to permit it on the job. Among those attending the Ottawa rally were 2 Tory rebel MPs, kicked out of the Alberta caucus for their opposition to their government's plans. One of them called on the Senate to kill the bill if his Conservative colleagues will not join him.
If government MPs ignore their constituents in better judgment, the unelected, unrepresentative, unreformed Senate can at last serve the interests of all of us by holding the bill up until after the next election.
Herb Gray vowed that is exactly what the Liberal-dominated Senate will do.
we can defeat this tax now, but if it doesn't happen, I say to you, this fight will continue in the Senate. It will continue across Canada.
The Senate delaying tactics will start soon. The Commons holds its final vote on GST tomorrow night. Craig Oliver, CTV News in Ottawa.
The Federal Minister of Justice, Kim Campbell, has announced the government will table new gun control legislation next month. She was speaking at the University of Montreal's engineering school, where 14 women were murdered last December. Campbell says the new law will act to limit the people who can buy guns. She warned that under the legislation, some people will still be able to buy semi-automatic weapons. Students at the engineering school gave Campbell a petition with 500,000 names urging stricter gun laws. An important native land claim agreement was signed in Yellowknife today. The Dene and the Métis have been given control of more than 180,000 square kilometers of land in the Northwest Territories. They will get mineral rights to part of that land and $500 million in cash compensation. The deal follows 14 years of negotiating with Ottawa. And still to come in our news tonight, huge crowds renew calls for independence in Soviet Georgia, and the death toll continues to mount from a disastrous ship fire off Norway. We'll be back in just 1 minute. East Germany's new non-communist government is being called a grand coalition of 5 parties. The man who will become Prime Minister, Lothar de Maizière, says he has put together a deal that gives him the 2/3 majority needed for constitutional change. That paves the way for eventual unification with West Germany. But the 2 biggest parties in the coalition still disagree on how fast the 2 Germanys should unite. In the Soviet Union, Moscow is putting more pressure on Lithuania. Mikhail Gorbachev's new presidential council met today and decided to take what it called economic, political, and other measures to protect the interests of Soviet citizens in the Baltic state. And the demands for independence from Moscow are growing elsewhere in the Soviet Union. In Soviet Georgia today, thousands demonstrated to commemorate another march a year ago, a march that was brutally attacked by Soviet troops. Martha Teichner of CBS News reports.
On the anniversary of the April 9th massacre, Georgians marched on the headquarters of the Soviet Army in the Caucasus, the Georgian Pentagon, shouting, "Russians out." They denounced the Soviet soldiers as an army of occupation and called them murderers. Today, the Georgians turned more militant, taking their demand for freedom straight to the Soviets' doorstep. But last night, the mood was solemn, mournful. They came as if to a state funeral and stood all night, packed into Tbilisi's central square, where a year ago, 21 people killed by Soviet soldiers became instant martyrs to the cause of Georgian independence. And April 9th became a day of national mourning for a people demanding to be a nation.
We are going by the way of civil and national disobedience, peaceful political fight, strikes, demonstrations, meetings. It is our way.
In Tbilisi, that's meant little acts of insurrection against the Soviets. A statue of Stalin defaced by vandals. Inside the Marxism-Leninism building, a potted plant where Lenin used to stand. A Georgian citizen burns his Soviet passport. Others burn a Russian soldier in effigy.
It's finished, and everybody in Gorbachev knows it.
In the fall, Georgians intend to elect their own Congress, completely outside the Soviet political structure. Independence leaders are convinced that within 5 years, it will be the official government of a free Georgia. Martha Teichner, CBS News, Tbilisi.
The other side of change in the Soviet Union is economic. And today, PepsiCo announced it has made a $3 billion deal that will now double the number of its soft drink plants in the Soviet Union to 50. To pay for it, the Soviets must barter. So Pepsi will get Russian vodka and 10 Soviet-built ships, which can then be sold for hard currency. The death toll is still mounting in that suspicious fire that destroyed a ferry off the coast of Norway on the weekend. It's now believed as many as 200 people may have died aboard the Scandinavian Star. 1 in 4 victims may have been a child. Today, police continued their search through the burned-out wreck. ABC's Hillary Belker reports.
Police are now looking for evidence on the Scandinavian Star to help them determine how the fire started.
The Swedish police, working at the theory that the fire must be done on purpose.
The ship's captain has insisted it was arson all along. Regardless of whether the fires were deliberately set, critics of the ferry company say they should have been controlled, the crew better trained to handle the crisis. The Swedish Seamen's Union says it was worried about safety conditions on the ferry before the fire.
With the crew that we have been speaking with, one at a hospital there, for instance, only 17 years old, never been on a vessel before, didn't get any information about the safety, no education at all.
Critics say the lax safety standards on the Scandinavian Star caused too many people to die. They consider the fire a crime, even if there was no arson. Hillary Balker, ABC News, Lysekil, Sweden.
In what some people are speculating could be copycat arson, there were 2 more fires today aboard European ferries. In the English Channel, a blaze erupted in the engine room of a French ferry. 1 passenger had a heart attack and died, and a crew member was hospitalized for smoke inhalation. The cause of the fire was not known. And in the Irish Sea, 1 man died and 32 people were injured when fire broke out on a Danish-owned ferry. Several of the wounded were airlifted to hospital suffering smoke inhalation, cuts, and bruises. The fire started in 2 empty cabins. When the ferry returned to Wales, more than 200 passengers and 78 crew were detained for questioning by police. British television reports say 3 men have been arrested. An IRA bomb killed 4 members of Northern Ireland's Ulster Defence Regiment today. It was the most deadly attack by the IRA so far this year. The bomb was set at a crossroads and remotely detonated from a nearby hillside. The explosion tossed the Land Rover more than 30 meters over a hedge and into a field. A blast crater quickly filled with water. 4 other soldiers and 2 civilians who were following escaped injury but were treated for shock. Prisons across Britain are on alert tonight. At least 14 of them have been hit by a wave of unrest, rioting sparked by the siege at Strangeways prison in Manchester. Authorities have been waging a war of nerves against the inmates still holed up there, and tonight 2 more gave up. At another prison, force was used to end the rioting. Roger Smith reports.
This is the scene inside Dartmoor Jail, and it's just a fraction of the damage done by copycat riots sweeping through British prisons. In a 24-hour rampage that left 1 prisoner dead, 100 inmates trashed cells and tossed wreckage into the safety net below. When the rest gave in, a lone holdout stayed on to shout complaints of brutality.
Brutality in this prison!
Some Dartmoor inmates were transferred to nearby Bristol and quickly joined in another uprising. Their banner, Dartmoor Boys on Tour. It was an all too familiar sight, defiant inmates hurling tiles and taunts from the roof. But this time, authorities moved quickly, regaining control after an early morning assault. 13 prisoners and 12 guards were hurt. The use of force was warning of a new hard line.
No prisoner will gain anything whatsoever from further incidents of this kind.
Yet at Strangeways, the prison where it all started more than a week ago, the wait-them-out tactics continue. Officials say an assault is too dangerous because rebels have set booby traps. But one London tabloid echoes the growing call to get tough with rioters.
The more that they're pandered to, the more they're going to continue, and they're demonstrating that right across the country and have done for the last 2 weeks.
Amid attempts to end the crisis, the bleak prison conditions that started it were condemned by the Archbishop of Canterbury.
It is possible for there to be justice which is strained of vengeance and has an element of healing in it.
The Archbishop is just one of many voices calling for major changes in the justice system. Critics say Britain's crumbling Victorian prisons are oppressive and they're overcrowded, mainly because judges send too many people to prison for the most minor of crimes. Roger Smith, CTV News, London.
In our next segment, the conduct of a judge under scrutiny in Quebec, and family violence. An inquest examines a Manitoba tragedy. Now here is an impressive golden handshake. The former chief officer of the Canadian Development Investment Corporation, Joel Bell, has been awarded $3.4 million by the Ontario Supreme Court. Bell sued the Crown Corporation for wrongful dismissal. He was appointed by the Liberals and fired by the Tories in 1984. The court said Bell was badly treated. The man who was the object of one of the biggest manhunts in Canadian history last year was committed for trial in Moncton, New Brunswick today. Alan Legier eluded more than 100 Mounties for almost 7 months until he was caught last November. The 42-year-old native of the Miramichi was shackled and handcuffed during today's preliminary hearing on charges of escaping lawful custody, kidnapping, and assault with a weapon. Legier asked his lawyer not to ban publication of evidence at the hearing. There was an unusual reversal of roles in Quebec today when a judge entered a witness box to speak in her own defense. Youth Court Judge André Ruffo appeared before the Quebec Judicial Council to face complaints that she is too outspoken. But Judge Ruffo said she did it all for the good of the kids she is sworn to protect. Ken Ernhofer reports.
André Ruffo is so used to speaking out, she wrote a book defending children's rights. That outspokenness got her into trouble with Quebec's Judicial Council. She faces 10 complaints of violating the judge's ethics code. Among them that she went too far in criticizing Quebec's child welfare system.
I think it's a part of my role and it's very important for me to do so. Otherwise, I would certainly not be true to the children that I'm to protect.
Once Ruffo was so incensed by the lack of group homes, she ordered a boy who needed one sent to the office of Quebec's Social Affairs Minister. Officials found a group home for the youth within days.
Ruffo told the disciplinary committee hearing the case that for children, an absence of resources is the same as an absence of rights. The case comes as Quebec's youth protection system is under fire for inadequate resources. 4 girls died in this blaze at a youth detention center, a high-security facility forced to take some children who should have been elsewhere.
Susan was supposed to be in a closed unit?
No, she was supposed to be in an open unit. That's what scared the hell out of me.
Money. In the end, it's money and putting it to practical application.
Ruffo's lawyer says judges have a unique view on how the system breaks down and have a right to say so.
Because these problems can be brought only to the attention of the public through these persons.
But the lawyer for the social services director who brought the charges disagrees.
We say there are limits to the freedom of speech to the judges because of the fact that they are judges.
Ruffo's case also comes at a time that some Supreme Court judges have urged more openness. The Judicial Council could recommend that Ruffo be removed from the bench. A ruling is expected later this year. Ken Ernhofer, CTV News, Montreal.
Bombardier, the giant Montreal firm that started out in snowmobiles, has bought the Learjet Corporation for $75 million. The deal expands Bombardier's aircraft business. The company already owns Learjet's competitor, Canadair. That makes the Challenger corporate jet. The deal must be approved by a U.S. bankruptcy court. An inquest in Winnipeg will be asked whether a tragedy that occurred last June might have been avoided. That's when the father of what seemed to be an average family shot his wife and children before turning the gun on himself. The shootings occurred in a quiet neighborhood and demonstrated once again that family violence can occur anywhere. Today, an inquest began. Joy Melvin has the story.
Last June, a peaceful neighborhood in St. Boniface turned into a battle zone. At the end of a 2-day siege, police fired tear gas and stun grenades. Within minutes, it was all over. 40-year-old Ray Reed had shot his wife, Mary Ann, his 17-year-old son, Jimmy, and 15-year-old son, Brad, as neighbors looked on in horror. Then he killed himself. Today, an inquest into the Reed tragedy is asking why this family self-destructed.
It's a middle-class neighborhood. It's a quiet neighborhood. It's a neighborhood in a community that has, as I said this morning, an abundance of material and social resources. There appears to be no reason why something as horrendous as this should have happened.
Family, friends, and neighbors say there were warning signs. Ray Reed was unemployed and known to be a heavy drinker. There were quarrels and domestic abuse. During the standoff, Reed told police that he went on a killing rampage because his wife hadn't shown him any sympathy when he threatened suicide.
I don't know that they fell through the cracks.
Several social service agencies in Winnipeg worked with the Reeds. They now feel they're being put under the microscope.
Dangerosity, as they used to call it, is an element that's just unpredictable. I don't think there are any indexes that I know of that can tell you with any kind of degree of accuracy that this kind of tragedy is going to happen next week or next year or 6 months from now.
But it did happen. Family violence can happen anywhere. By reliving the Reed nightmare, this inquest hopes to make sense of a terrible tragedy in hopes that it can never happen again. Joy Malvin, CTV News, Winnipeg.
When we come back, peering into the mysteries of the universe with an incredible new telescope. It's a day baseball fans dream about during those dark days of winter, and this year it looked as if it might never arrive. But the boys of summer finally came out to play as the 1990 Major League Baseball season opened today. The first pitch was thrown out at Fenway Park in Boston by Tony Giamatti, widow of former baseball commissioner Bart Giamatti. For only the second time in history, the season was delayed. It started a week late because of a labor dispute in which the players were locked out by the team owners. Tomorrow morning, if the weather holds, the Space Shuttle Discovery will begin a mission that could take mankind deeper into space than ever before. The shuttle's cargo is a giant telescope that will give the first clear look at universe light years back in time. Robert Hurst reports.
Scientists will be able to see farther than they've ever seen before into the sky and deep into the heavens, the grandest leap in astronomy since Galileo's first telescope in 1609. The Hubble telescope will be unhindered by the atmosphere, which acts like a fog and distorts earthbound instruments.
We recognize that we're on the threshold of a new era in astronomy, and therefore a new era in humankind's understanding of its place in the universe.
The Hubble telescope is packed into the shuttle Discovery's cargo bay and is ready for launch, though the weather at Cape Canaveral is deteriorating. The space telescope is the size of a railway boxcar. It's the heaviest cargo a shuttle has ever attempted to lift into space. Work on the telescope began 15 years ago. It's $1 billion over budget, and the project has been much delayed. Its mirror is the finest ever made. Its guidance system so precise, it can lock onto a dime atop the Washington Monument from a skyscraper in New York City 380 kilometers away. And once aligned, the Hubble Space Telescope can see a firefly 20,000 kilometers away.
We're likely to find some things that just nobody thought about. And that's, you know, that's real exploration.
I would like to see the discovery of another solar system. I think that's possible, and if there's solar systems out there, I think Hubble should find one.
It will search the heavens for signs of life. It will track quasars and peer into black holes where the gravity is so strong that no light can escape. Science cannot predict what it will find, possibly an answer to the universe, or possibly a lot more questions about it. Robert Hurst, CTV News, Washington.
Tomorrow on Canada AM, the U.S. Ambassador to Canada talks about the meeting between Prime Minister Mulroney and U.S. President George Bush in Toronto. I'm Lloyd Robertson for CTV News. Good night.
This is CTV.